Yesterday evening, we spoke on the phone with Minister of Justice and Attorney General David Lametti. And prior to that, we have met with his chief of staff and other employees in the Department of Justice that have relayed our messages and demands forward as the day went on yesterday. Yesterday, we also started our sit-in, so we got pretty quick response in terms of his response to us. And on the call and in statements that he has released to the press, he explained how this was a domestic issue, what is happening in Wet'suwet'en territories, and the human rights violations happening on their territories is a domestic and provincial issue, and that the federal government cannot get involved. So here Gabby will explain why this is not the case.
So we really want to remind everyone, especially in this moment, to all Canadians, you have a responsibility to understand what the Royal Proclamation is. If you do not know what the Royal Proclamation is, please do some research right now. Google it. You know, you have all the tools in the world. Please understand what the Royal Proclamation is. It is essentially a treaty that was created in the 1700s, which allowed for the creation of Canada. So everything that we have here is because of the Royal Proclamation. And right now, what's happening in Wet'suwet'en is a breach of the Royal Proclamation. And so the honor of the Crown is at stake. And so this is why the federal government has a huge responsibility to what's happening. It is not a provincial issue. And the federal government needs to take that stand and answer these questions and these demands as such. Wet'suwet'en is an unceded territory. There was never a treaty signed there. So essentially, Canada and the RCMP are invading illegally Indigenous lands. And so they have to stop playing hot potato with the issue and take responsibility.
So just to build off of what Gabby said, the federal government in different departments have taken the stance that this is a provincial issue and that the federal government cannot get involved because of such. However, we have explained our demands to him that he meet with hereditary chiefs of Wet'suwet'en, that CISO and RCMP leave that territory, but that the people that have been detained and arrested are allowed back to their territories, and that the exclusion zone on unceded Wet'suwet'en territory be demolished. And if anyone could do that, that could be the Attorney General. He has certain rights. He has obligations to fulfill. He has commitments to UNDRIP. The federal government in general has committed themselves to implementing UNDRIP as time goes on, and that the Constitution and Section 35 is also what's at stake here, and basic human rights is also what's at stake for the Wet'suwet'en peoples, and that we are asking the Attorney General to take action. That being said, we are giving the Attorney General and Minister of Justice 24 hours in which we will understand what he's trying to do, what are his concrete steps in taking actions towards reconciliation, a meaningful nation-to-nation relationship, and upholding his legislative responsibilities to this country. So 24 hours is what we're giving him, which is more than generous, considering that we have been stating our demands since 48 hours, and that across the country our demands have been echoed, and that the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have been saying this for decades. So it is unacceptable.
Yeah. Good. Yep.
Good. So we can take questions.
24 hours
Are you-
or what? Like, what's 20? You're giving him 24
24 hours
hours.
or
24
reconciliation is dead.
24 hours in order to prove that he is taking concrete actions into fulfilling his roles and obligations as the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. And 24 hours so that he can prove to Canadians that he is dedicated to reconciliation and that he is upholding his powers as Attorney General and Minister of Justice and fulfilling his obligations.
Or what? Or what? Like what happens after 24 hours if he doesn't do it?
Our sit-in will cease as there's nowhere further to go, and that will be sufficient response. We'll consider like next steps. Yeah.
So
I'm not sure I'm getting it. So you're doing a sit-in, and if he's not answering, you're leaving?
we are leaving our sit-in because it is obviously ineffective to try and talk to somebody who is not committed to reconciliation and to upholding the powers of this country, which is his job. So we're giving him 24 hours to do his job, essentially, to resolving these issues at hand, or at least having a plan to resolve these issues at hand properly. And if he does not, then we will cease our sit-in. We will have another press conference where we will, declare that the federal government has refused action to actually implementing reconciliation, and that further reconciliation in the future should immediately stop, because reconciliation is meaningless if it is not applied to situations and human rights violations that are happening right now.
Do you think it's likely that he's going to do anything in the next 24 hours, given how long this has already gone on for? You've already spoken to him, and just given some of the record of the Trudeau government as it is, do you even think that anything's going to happen?
I think if he cared about Canadians and if he cared about Indigenous peoples, he can make it happen.
Are you going to be staying here for the next 24 hours?
We will be staying here until we see his concrete actions. 24 hours.
And how many are you in here in total?
So far we're 24 that have did the overnight occupation. We have a lot of supporters that come and go throughout the day. We've reached a maximum of like 100 people yesterday just coming and checking up on us and giving us supplies and everything that we need.
Do you have the blessing of the local Algonquin nations?
Sorry?
Do you have the blessings of the local Algonquin
To
nations?
do a sit-in?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have discussed this with other Algonquin leaders and the traditional elders of this land. In terms of on the record, Indigenous peoples usually don't disclose that.
But usually the Algonquin nation will give a blessing to have a protest, right? Did you get any type of blessing?
People have been protesting all over the country. We don't need a blessing to protest. But we're not representing the Algonquin nation, we're representing Indigenous youth and allies in this sit-in for Wet'suwet'en. And if they would like to join us, we're obviously open to that.
Have you told the Justice Minister that you're going to be leaving in 24 hours?
Well, we have just had a meeting with some of his officials that have already relayed that message to him. So he understands what we have said to you, because we've already said that to them.
So if you're going to leave in 24 hours, do you think there's any incentive for him to do anything?
Yes, because if he wants to relay a clear message to Canadians and Indigenous peoples that he cares about reconciliation, that this nation-and-nation relationship is important to him, he would take action. That should be enough of an incentive, don't you think, to uphold human rights? Is that not an incentive?
You also said that reconciliation would be dead if he doesn't do anything in 24 hours. What would that mean for the federal government?
That would mean that we don't expect the federal government to uphold their reconciliation platform no longer, because they have already proved to Indigenous peoples that the reconciliation that they have promised us is meaningless. Therefore, we don't expect them to implement reconciliation in their legislation, in their plans going forward, And that goes with all Indigenous peoples.
So UNDRIP would be unnecessary. I mean, that's still a promise from the Trudeau government.
So UNDRIP has nothing to do with reconciliation. UNDRIP is an international Indigenous rights that's been upheld by Indigenous people around the world and their governments. So it actually has nothing to do with reconciliation, and it was actually adopted prior to this conversation around reconciliation. Reconciliation has really been co-opted by the Canadian government. It no longer is the narrative of Indigenous peoples. And we see that. How could any Indigenous person feel like reconciliation is happening when Indigenous people are being removed from their homelands and territories? So we're giving the minister 24 hours, and in the next 24 hours, we'll have another press conference to talk about next steps. So that's not to say that in 24 hours there will be nothing. There will actually be more mobilization in 24 hours.
What is that mobilization going to look like?
You'll see in 24 hours.
Just to be clear that this is not a threat, again, that we are peaceful, we are unarmed, we have been occupying this space in ceremony, that we have been holding space, and Indigenous peoples have been drumming all day and have been, praying all day for future generations, and that future mobilization is already happening in the country. That's essentially what we're saying, is that there's already national attention. We already have international bodies like the UN and the discrimination of racial discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got that wrong. ELAS. And they have said that that they should cease construction of certain projects, including CJL, because of the human rights violations happening to Indigenous peoples.
We're in Ottawa. You could have picked any federal cabinet minister's portfolio or office to occupy, including the Prime Minister, or to protest at. Why specifically Minister Lametti? Why is he the target for you here in Ottawa?
I wouldn't use the word target, okay? I would use a peaceful occupation as the label of what we're doing right now, and we wanted to meet with him. Let's remind ourselves why we're here. We wanted to meet with him in order so that we can convey our demands directly to him. Unfortunately, he was out of town.
Why him specifically?
I'm getting there. So, we've held this space and we've had him on the phone, but we have the right to believe, and all Canadians have the right to believe that the Justice Minister has obligations to justice. It's pretty simple, right? So there are injustices happening in Wet'suwet'en, and we expect them to be addressed by the federal government.
Yesterday, the minister's office said that he'd be bringing this to cabinet. Does that fit into the 24 hours that you've given him?
It could fit in, but again, we have asked him to meet with Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs so that he can understand their concerns firsthand. Of course, we're not representing Wet'suwet'en in any way. We are supporters of Wet'suwet'en, and what is happening there, we are just trying to bring forth the issues so that increased attention to this issue that is completely unacceptable is happening.
And just after so many years of criticism for the Trudeau government, they've also approved a pipeline. They might approve this Tech Frontier mine. How do you have any faith still whatsoever in the government to do anything?
I mean, they're human beings, right? Like, we've all got families, we've all got loved ones. Maybe Justin Trudeau wants some grandchildren. You need to leave them a world that is livable, and Indigenous peoples have always been the first stewardess of this land, and we will maintain our role for as long as we live. And that means for all Canadians, not just our future generations. That includes your children as well.
Have you had any contact with the Wet'suwet'en? Have you spoken to them about your protest?
Yeah, we spoke with them last night. Molly, who was arrested, she just got released, and we were FaceTiming her.
And what was the response to what you're doing here in Ottawa?
She just gave us some of the demands and agreed with some of the demands, and we went with that.
Stupid question, but you mentioned you're not part of the Wet'suwet'en. Are you part of an Indigenous community?
We're all Indigenous. Yeah, we're all the four of us are Indigenous and some other folks are, but we're also here with our allies as well. But we do not represent any entities or organizations. We're here as individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you all tomorrow.